So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our first ever virtual open house. So Lamont open house at home for 2020. So my name is Cassie, and I'm sure you've all gotten plenty of emails from me over the past week or so. And I direct Lamont's Education Office of Education and Outreach. For those who aren't familiar with Lamont yet, I'm sure you will be by the end of this week. We have a great week of programming lined up, both for K-12 audiences as well as adults. Any science enthusiast who's interested in learning more about what we do. We've got TED-style-like talks, we have panels, we have all our K-12 sessions, and we also have a lot of great pre-recorded content on our website. And if you don't know to find that yet, it's openhouse.ldeo.columbia.edu, and I'll be sure to share that as well. We are Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory is a fairly well-known, I would say, research institution. Lamont is part of the Earth Institute at Columbia University, and the Earth Institute itself is made up of about 24 or so research centers with scientists, policymakers, economists, public health experts, all working to foster greater understanding of the science behind sustainability and the climate crisis. The Lamont campus is actually located in Palisades, New York, and two other Earth Institute centers actually share this campus, including the International Research Institute for Climate and Society and the Center for International Earth Science Information Network. There will be a test at the end for all of these center names and acronyms that I will mention. Open House first started when Lamont's first director, Maurice Doc Ewing, an earth scientist, decided to open up our campus for one day each year to neighbors, the Columbia community, students, and beyond. And since then, we've been doing that. And this is our first, as I mentioned, our first virtual version. But we're really excited for people from all over the country to actually join us, because in a normal year, pre-COVID, we wouldn't necessarily have had our current reach. So I'm really excited to be able to offer something this year to reach new individuals. So the panel that we're going to have right now is appropriately titled, "When am I going to use this? Dynamic Careers in Science," because I think we've all been in science classrooms or learning and thinking, when am I actually going to use this information? We're going to hear from three different speakers today. So first we'll start off with Laurel DiSera, and she is with the International Research Institute for Climate and Society. And then we'll have Johnny Kingslake from Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, and then Dara Mendeloff from the Center for International Earth Science Information Network. And without further ado, I think I'll hand it over to Laurel to get started.
Hi, thanks so much. Like Cassie mentioned, my name is Laurel DiSera, and I am a PhD student and researcher at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what I do and how you can use the cool stuff that you know to do awesome and dynamic research in science. First, I'm going to start with what you probably look at every single day, or you hear it on the radio or you see it on the news. Whether you use an Apple phone or your Android, you are constantly looking at what the weather might look like. Do you need to bring a jacket to the park or an umbrella? What might the weather look like tonight? What is it going to look like tomorrow or this weekend for your friend's birthday party in the park? And this time period, like I mentioned, is what us as researchers consider to be weather, 1 day to 14 days, or about 2 weeks. And at the International Research Institute for Climate and Society, where I work, we focus on what is beyond weather. We focus on forecasting what we call sub-seasonal climate, and also seasonal climate, and even climate time periods that are beyond this time, such as decadal, 10 years into the future. And to do this, we make forecasts, and our most used, I would say, forecast is our seasonal forecast. So you probably live somewhere where your seasons maybe aren't necessarily 3 months, but that's kind of how we forecast. So for the next 3 months. In some places, winter might be longer than 3 months, but aside from that, we focus on that time period. So this forecast, it might be kind of crazy and look kind of intimidating, but if you kind of pick out the colors and see that the yellow and brown colors in some places are kind of together, that would suggest in that area that there is a high probability, the darker the brown, of below normal rainfall. And then the blue and the green kind of suggest a higher probability of above normal rainfall. So these are the kind of maps that we use every day to do the research that we do, depending on where we're doing our research. And we do research in a lot of different areas of the world. And you can see one thing that I'll have you note on this map. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but just over the US, it says for November, December, and January that we are going to have below normal rainfall in the southern United States and Mexico, which might not help the fires happening in California, but also might suggest something else. So at the IRI, we also look at climate events, such as you might have heard of El Nino events or La Nina events. And right now we are in a La Nina event. And you can see here, these are common what we call teleconnections of a La Nina event. And you see the dryness over the southern US. So La Nina events and El Nino events are formed in the Pacific Ocean. And they have to do with changes in the atmosphere and in the ocean temperature and other factors as well. But these changes have impacts all across the world. And so these are some of the things that we study. And how is rainfall changing in Africa? And why is it changing in that way? How is temperature changing in South America and why? So these are just kind of the things that we look at and we try to forecast as well. So how is it to work as a woman, as a scientist at the IRI? Well, I think it's really awesome. I get to not only work as a researcher, but I also get to work as someone who is involved with society, which I think is the coolest part. So here are some pictures that'll briefly describe what I do in a nutshell. The first, I'm kind of wearing my researcher hat. I was at a conference held by the CDC before COVID. Well, all of these were before, you know, the mask up time. And we were presenting, me and my advisor were presenting research done on mosquito diseases, mosquito-borne diseases in the US, and some of the tools that the IRI has been producing to be able to forecast outbreaks. The second picture here that you see is a time when I was in Guatemala giving a workshop with local decision makers, politicians, and even farmers in the country to help them understand what events like El Nino and La Nina events are, so that they can protect their communities and protect their farms from drought or large rainfall events. And then finally, this picture here on the right is a picture of me and some of my colleagues and some of the folks at the Caribbean Public Health Agency in Trinidad and Tobago, where we taught them about some of the tools that are available now to help protect their communities against mosquito-borne disease outbreaks. So I'll go a little bit into like the cool kind of biology-ish side of what I do now to talk more about these mosquito-borne disease outbreaks. So mosquito-borne diseases, as you all probably know from biology, you have probably studied mosquitoes or ecology of some sort, and you probably have dealt with them on a personal level outside when you've been walking around in the forest or out by a lake. But there are a lot of mosquito-borne diseases. So these are diseases carried and transmitted by mosquitoes. In fact, they kill approximately 1 million people every year. And that's just a tiny fraction of the 700 million people that are infected with these diseases every year. They are transferred essentially when the mosquito bites you and the saliva from the mosquito that's infected with the disease gets into your bloodstream when it's sucking your blood. That is how the disease gets transferred. Some of these diseases are malaria, Zika, dengue, West Nile, or chikungunya. You've probably heard of some of these, especially Zika, as there was a large outbreak in 2016. And this paper actually, funny enough, when I was looking into it, was published by our good friend, Anthony Fauci, who we've been hearing from quite frequently with the pandemic that we're currently experiencing. But you can kind of see how pervasive Zika was at the time around the world. So mosquito-borne diseases are a pretty big deal. So why should we, how are they impacted by climate? Why is that something that me as a climate researcher is, why am I studying them? So research has shown that aside from how people behave and how mosquitoes behave and how the socioeconomic conditions are in every country, aside from those, climate also plays a huge role in how these diseases can be transmitted. How does the mosquito grow? What is its life cycle like? What kind of climate factors impact mosquitoes? Well, rainfall impacts mosquitoes because they thrive and live in very moist environments. But temperature also impacts mosquitoes because we can't have mosquitoes living in very, very warm environments or too cold. So climate plays a huge role in mosquito-borne disease outbreaks. So at the IRI, we created this map room that can help decision makers and politicians better understand what is the likelihood that there might be a mosquito outbreak, a mosquito disease outbreak in their area. And these are just some of the tools that the IRI has and is creating to help communities forecast and create what we like to call early warning systems to help their communities. So by having an early warning system, we can potentially administer vaccines ahead of time for a mosquito outbreak, or spray for mosquitoes, or identify locations where there might be standing water that we can eliminate to try to prevent the spread of diseases within the mosquito populations. And finally, another utility for early warning systems would be to provide additional funding for hospitals if they're anticipating many people coming to get help when they're sick with dengue or Zika. So that's just some of the work that I have done. Some of the research that I'm currently working on, I mentioned earlier that there are different climate events that happen at different times, where they can be like an El Nino or a La Nina event that might happen every 3 to 4 years. But there are also events that happen on the sub-seasonal time scale that happen every 60 days or so. So my current research is looking into understanding what happens when an event that happens every 3 to 4 years is happening at the same time as one of these events that happen every 60 days. How does that impact rainfall? How does that change what might be experienced for farmers or for people who work in construction? There are a lot of different ways that this can really impact different people. So this is, I think, a really interesting place to study currently. So that's all that I have. We're going to hear from the other 2 panel speakers, but please let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laurel. And I think it's a great start for us as we start to explore some potential careers in geoscience, or otherwise commonly referred to as earth and environmental science, and just to show you kind of the range of areas that you can go to or go into. So Johnny, you are up next.
Thank you so much for everyone turning out on this in this virtual version of Open House, and thanks so much for being interested in geoscience and earth science and our careers in geoscience. So I was going to start with a slide about my career so far. So I'm from the UK, so I went to high school in the UK, and I focused on physics, math, and music, actually, because in the UK, at the end of your high school time, you have to specialize in some things already, which is very different than the US system. But then I moved on to do a degree in physics. So already are seeing that I'm really not necessarily starting out in geosciences at all. I really focused on maths and physics, and that's going to be a theme of what I'm going to say about the pathways into geoscience are pretty broad. So after doing that degree in physics at university, I went on to graduate school, which is where you get a PhD. And I was then, at that stage, I went into this thing called glaciology, which is the study of glaciers and ice sheets, these huge bodies of ice up in the mountains and at the poles on our planet. So at this point, I was starting to apply all these physics and maths skills to this part of the Earth system, which I'll tell you about more in a little bit. Then the next stage, now I know everyone's got varying degrees of experience in academic careers here, so sorry if I'm telling you things you already know here, but the next stage often is to do this thing called a postdoc, which is a postdoctoral scientist job. So the next job I went on to was being a glacier geophysicist. So now this is really combining all my experience here, because geophysics is the physics of the Earth, so geophysicist, and then applying, and specifically the physics of glaciers. And that was at the British Antarctic Survey. So I did fieldwork in Antarctica, and then 4.5 years ago, I moved over to Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, part of Columbia University in New York. And I've been an assistant professor there ever since. So what does that mean? What's our job role really is to teach undergraduates and to train graduate students and to supervise other postdocs and to do research of our own. And so I run this small group of people working on all aspects of glaciology. So let's talk about a few of these things. So these are our ice sheets. Here's Greenland on the left and Antarctica on the right. And the reason we study these things is because they are thinning, they are shrinking. So these things are huge slabs of ice, just similar to the ice you'd get in your freezer, but it's just built up naturally into these enormous continent-sized sheets of ice. So when they thin or shrink and get smaller, the sea level around the globe can go up, because they're such huge things that small changes in their mass actually makes a contribution to sea level all around the planet. So these two maps show some of this thinning, and the areas which are red are showing places which have thinned, and they're thinning at 1 meter up to 10 meters per year. So that's a huge change for something the size of a continent. To be changing that rapidly is very unusual, and one of the reasons I really get excited about glaciology. Okay, so there's loads of reasons why this is happening, and really this drives all our research in glaciology, trying to understand why this is happening. I'm just going to tell you about one aspect of it, which took us to Alaska to do some research on how snow compacts. What I mean by compacts is it squashes down under its own weight. So we went off to Alaska to measure compaction of snow, so how rapidly that's happening. And the reason we went to Antarctica partly was because of this amazing program they have up there, which called the Juneau Icefield Research Program. And Juneau Icefield is the area, and they run this research program up there, which, if you're interested in these kind of in any opportunities to do field work and get out into the mountains, are really, and your high school or undergraduate age, really encourage you to have a look at this as an opportunity. So we took a helicopter ride up to the ice to this field station. And so here's our helicopter landing here, and it landed on, I'm not sure if you can see this the video might be a little bit slow, but you can see this little area of rock here where we landed our helicopter and joined the rest of the team, ready to go off into the rest of the ice field to do our research. So what some of the things we were doing, we were drilling holes down into the snow so we could measure how much compaction had happened. And so these are high school students and undergraduate students helping us out. And then this is my graduate student, Elizabeth, running the drill here. You can see them placing that long cylinder down into the snow. And then they're going to place something on the top of that pole and turn it around and drill down into the snow to bring samples back up to the surface. What else was going on? We were using radar. So making pulses of electromagnetic waves, like radio waves, just like the radio waves, just like the radar you see at an airport, spinning around there on the top of the tower, looking at how far away planes are. We were doing the same thing, but looking downwards into the snow and the ice to measure how thick the ice was and to measure how quickly it was compacting. And so here's me crouching on the ground, telling these students about the radar. And this guy is Andrew, actually, who now is a student here in our program. So we managed to, so this program manages to capture some people's imagination enough to come along and do grad studies with us at Lamont. Okay, and then final slide here, or second to final slide, is to give you a sense of the scale of this place. Here's 6 or 7 students skiing back towards the field station, having camped out on the ice here for a week. And as this camera zooms out, you'll see the scale of this landscape we're looking at. So that gives you a taste of what fieldwork is like, and it's really the most beautiful place I've ever been. And I just wanted to end on a few notes of just why glaciology and what earth science in general is so much fun and such a good option for a career. And it's got to be, the highlights have got to be being able to work with intelligent and thoughtful people, working on interesting topics, working on interesting processes like snow compaction, like ice flow, like fracturing, like you see all these cracks here in this ice as it flows down this hill. These are all processes which we don't understand very well. And applying the physics and the maths you learn at high school and undergraduate to these processes can really reveal a lot about how the world works. And it also is relevant for the society. We care about whether these ice sheets and ice fields shrink because sea level changes affect communities all around the world living on the coast. And this is genuinely applying everything from algebra you learn at high school or middle school, through calculus you learn at high school or undergraduate, you know, vector calculus, fluid dynamics, all these things you learn if you're doing a physics class apply directly to this part of earth science. And that's true across the whole of geosciences. So if the title of this session is, when am I ever going to use that? Well, this is a really, really strong example of we need people in this field who understand this stuff, who understand calculus and know how to write computer code, as well as all the cool stuff I just showed you about flying helicopters around Alaska. That writing down equations is central to all of our work too. So yeah, happy to answer any more questions at the end in the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Johnny. There is one question that I think you should take live, simply because it's more directly related to your work, and it's about software tools that you use to assist you with your research. Yeah,
so we use a whole range of different scientific computing software. So one thing I use a lot is a thing called MATLAB, and I don't know whether you've heard of that software. It's a powerful piece of software which allows you to do all sorts of programming. More generally, people are increasingly using Python-based scientific computing packages, which are open source and free to anyone. So if you wanted to look into this, you get into the world of Python, scientific computing in Python. There's a whole world of free resources, open source, free to anyone in the world, which you can look into.
Yeah, thank you. Last but not least, we have Dara Mendeloff.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to start off by saying that I'm jealous of these other two careers. My career is a little bit different, but I make use of all of the things that Laurel and Johnny produce. I am a geographic information specialist. Basically, I'm a geographer, and I make maps. So I focus on working with data, spatial data, where things are, where people live, and how they interact with their environment. So all in the context of climate and sustainability. So I just wanted to give you an overview of how I got here and what I do. So I'll start off by telling you that since high school and before, since I came out the womb, I loved animals, I loved the environment. I watched a lot of National Geographic. I have a lot of National Geographic magazines. I wanted to be a National Geographic photographer. So I want to be out in the field, seeing what's going on, the ecology of how animals work in their environment, how the environment works, all of the above. So I went to high school for the environmental studies, and was just really interested to know the science behind all of that. For college, I have an environmental science degree and focused on marine ecology because I also love the ocean. This is a picture of some fish staining. I did that for my college thesis. Went to go get a job in environmental science field and then realized, uh-oh, I need some more math. And I always loved math. I guess I loved it enough to get a degree in math and computer science. So math was totally relevant for even, going out into the field and taking photographs. So I have 2 bachelors, and I had taken a class called GIS in one of those degrees and realized that there was a way to combine all of these things. GIS is a tool that we use to make maps. So that's what I ended up doing. So GIS is Geographic Information Systems. It's a tool that we use to make maps and do analysis. And so we take data, things that you do in the field, a lot of the climate information that Laurel works with, a lot of the glacial information that Johnny works with, all of those samples, and we bring it back to a database and correlate with other maybe human factors. How does that relate to where we live? And so there's this intersection between data on the computer and the real world. And I think that's a fascinating interdisciplinary field. So this is an example of how GIS works. There's a database, some tabular information, and it relates to a map where things are. And from that, we can produce lots of different types of maps telling different stories. And I love the visual aspect. So you don't have to, my next slide is GIS and data science is not all about coding. It's incredibly useful, like Johnny was saying, to know things like Python and MATLAB or GIS software. So I do spend some time coding, but it's not all about coding. It's also about being able to work in a team and collaboration. So a lot of my work and a lot of my time is spent figuring out what the research should be, what are the different criteria. I work with different types of scientists in order to figure out what kind of map and data we need to put out there in order to solve our problems. So Cassie, I stole this image from a project we have called Make with Data, working with high school students like you all to solve spatial problems. So you can see the collaborative effort here. And that's my everyday. Sometimes I get to go to the field as well. So this is just an example on the left of field study. I'm also an educator. I like to teach. So I teach, this is a graduate class at Columbia University. We went to a park called Black Rock Forest, where we did some data collection. So much fun. Go out with these balloons or a GPS unit, see what's going on in the environment, put it in a database, and then you go back and make some maps to convey those, whatever we found. This is an example of a trip that I was able to make to India. These are 2 indigenous ladies from, I forget what part of India they're from, but they wanted to protect their sacred land. There were a lot of political issues going on where their environment was in danger. So we trained them to use a GPS on their phone to take pictures and map out their sacred area so that they can bring it to the courts and protect their land. So lots of cool different types of projects. Where I work currently is at CIESIN. It's that really long acronym that Cassie had mentioned, the Center for International Earth Science Information Network. And we work at the intersection of humans and the environment. These are some example data sets that we produced. Population. We have collaborators at the Nature Conservancy that works on the human footprint, looking at the influence that human development has on our ecosystems. or on our land, Jamaica Bay water quality database. So we're looking at 100 years worth of water quality information in an estuary that's that's a big part of New York City. We have a lot of our data is provided in map services, web map services. So you don't have to download the data. You can include it in any kind of web mapping application that you may have. This is a panel where you can look at environmental performance index. So countries and how well they're performing environmentally. Compare that to PM 2.5, which is an indicator of air quality. And you can correlate all these different variables in this mapping platform. We also have a mapping app with our NASA data center. We have a NASA data and application center called SEDAC. This is a hazards mapper where we have earthquakes, nuclear power plants, and lots of natural disasters that are ongoing. And we have the ability to interact with this map and calculate how many people might be affected in the area of the natural disaster that's ongoing. Here's an interesting data set with some of our collaborators. This is the Development Threat Index. Lots of habitat is in danger. So the darker the areas here have more threat to human development. A data set we just put out was food insecurity hotspots. This is looking at areas where people are suffering from food insecurity and the level in which there's food insecurity. This is looking at 10 years worth of information. Why do we care about this? Because we want to know not just where food insecurity is, but what's causing it. So we have some collaborators, some partners that are looking at how climate variables interact with these areas. And the last project I wanted to share with you was mapping sustainable development goals in a mining community in Chile. Last field trip that I was able to make before the pandemic, I was able to go to Chile and work with a mining company to kind of explore how mining was affecting this community in where they had a mine going on, and develop this mapping applications. And the last thing I wanted to share with you was open data. So wherever you are in the country or in the world, check out what local open data is available in your community. This is an example of something you might find. This is 311 service requests. This is an exercise we looked at noise complaints, which is kind of interesting given that everybody is home now. How has the noise level changed and what type of noises are occurring? So I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of different types of data sets that might be available in your area that you can start playing with. That's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dara. What I loved, and I think hopefully I strategically selected the three of you because I think it's so interesting the range of work that you've just all presented on. You shared some of your interests, how you started out, how you ended up to sort of where you are, and I love that it kind of showcases just how interdisciplinary earth and environmental science and geoscience actually is. And I wanted to come back to I think each of you commented on this, but the teams that you get to work on, and I think Johnny, you mentioned that you don't just you're not just the even if you're just interested in geoscience, you're not just a math person or a physics person, that you also can be the person, you can be the engineer, you can be the person flying the helicopter, you can be the person there's kind of a role for everyone to play. So I'm curious if you could perhaps each of you comment about sort of the teams that you've worked on and the different roles that people have played on those teams, that you can be involved in geoscience, even if you're not necessarily, the lead scientist. I guess, hopefully that makes sense. So we can go in the reverse order. So maybe I'll go with Dara, Johnny, and then Laurel.
That's a really good question. I work with a lot of different types of scientists, like you said, with different roles. But the one thing that's consistent is that we're all interested in making a difference. So depending on, what type of project it is, we're all interested in using science in order to address this problem. And so I might not be the one going to the field. I don't get to go to Alaska and monitor the glaciers, but I get exposed to somebody else who has done that. And so I don't have to specialize in all those tools, which is really cool. I get to focus on a different aspect. And so I guess even though you don't have a particular role, you might not be into math, you might be a designer. We work with a lot of designers, and that's a huge responsibility, is how we communicate the scientific results to the outside world. So if visual arts is your thing, there's still a way for you to interpret what a scientist is doing and make that visual. So there's a role for everybody in really whatever we do. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also wanted to agree with Dara's point about mapping. I mean, all the field work is, the first thing we do is open a mapping piece of software and plan out our field work in that same software, which I recognize the tabulated data, I recognize it from that. So it's totally vital. All that those mapping skills are central to everything we do, and how we visualize the data and how we analyze it. And so the teams is totally true. I mean, we work with a whole bunch of different teams, and one of the things Dara also said was teamwork being so important, and just communication. I think for me, actually, even though I was kind of asked to talk about fieldwork because it's a really inspiring, great part of everyone's people who get to do fieldwork, it's a great part of their career. But in reality, really what you spend most of your time is in front of a computer working out how to best to communicate your science to everyone else. In my world, it's mostly writing academic papers, but other people, would spend more time on making beautiful websites with data in it, or writing blog posts. And so that's just a huge skill to learn, and you will learn that if you get into academia. Like, communicating your science in a clear way is the biggest challenge, but the biggest benefit of a career in science. But the teams aspect is what the actual question was about. Sorry. So definitely engineers and field assistants and scientists and different people at different levels. So people coming into science very early on, people in the middle of their career like me, or early career to middle, and then more senior people. Communicating across all those different groups is so important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the groups across all sorts of fields. So I not only have my team at the IRI that I work with, people who are making the database and building those data libraries where we can store all of our information, and they have that specialized task of building and coding, and they're really great at it. Not so much, that's not so much what I do or what I'm great at. And not only, so I have those folks, I have folks at the IRI who are doing work that is somewhat related to me, but not quite. And then I have the folks that are at the partners that we work with, whether that be the World Health Organization, who are trying to learn information about earth science, but are also contributing data that they have from, for example, transportation data to understand how people move around and how might mosquitoes be transporting diseases between different populations. So working with folks in the health sector, as they learn and are gathering information about climate and about the environment as well. It's just a really cool opportunity to meet people that have a common interest and are hungry to learn more and to grow and to help people in society. So it's really, really cool.
And we have a question from Melissa that I wanted folks to take a stab at answering live, because I think this is super important. A lot of, you'll hear from, all our experts have talked about sort of where they are in their careers now. Dara has 2 bachelor's degrees, and she's an overachiever. No, I love it. But how do you get involved as a younger student, I think is a really good question. And how do you get involved as a high school student? So I'm going to have Johnny start on this, because I think the Juneau Icefield Research Program is a great spot to start. And then Dara and Laurel, if you want to chime in as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Juno Icefield Research Program, they take high school students every year up onto the ice field. Not this summer, but hopefully they will restart again next summer. It does cost some money, unfortunately, and they're looking at ways of increasing the number of scholarships which they can give out every year. So trying to get some more funding. And I guess and we do high school internships at Lamont too, which is something to look into. And I've worked with some high school students recently who have really taken on that suggestion, which I said earlier, of looking into Python, open source computing, and really they can get involved for free at this stage. And there's so many skills to learn out there in the whole open source community. But you have to be kind of imaginative and seek those out, I think.
Great. And we actually, someone just chimed in, Allison, thank you, and asked about a middle school student. You want to get started even earlier. I think that, there are, from my experience, that a lot of the research experiences do start with high school students. But I would, if you're interested in at least learning more, events like these, especially now that most of them have gone virtual, hearing from different scientists, learning about the different fields that you can potentially go into, connecting with them in different ways. A lot of our scientists now have very active social media accounts and presence, and they, following along with what they do, what they're reading. If you're interested in getting to know the field a little bit more, that's certainly one way to get involved. I think we're also starting to see a lot of and hopefully more is climate change content being taught in schools. There's a lot of schools that are very active with green clubs, with environmental clubs. They collaborate across schools. If you don't have a green club at your school, you can definitely start one. So those are some ideas. I don't know why I'm answering the question. I'm simply the facilitator. Dara, you're next.
Those are great though, Cassie. Those are really good suggestions. I'll just add, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations in your communities that are doing a lot of cool work also, and a lot of them offer programs. I work with the Wave Hill Garden Center, has a high school internship program. It's a really cool program looking at urban ecology. It's a garden center, but it's a scientific oriented internship. So check out things like that. Go to your local garden center and see if they have opportunities for you. There are internships everywhere. I would also just to clarify, I have 2 bachelor's and a master's degree. I don't have a PhD, so I'm not a PhD. I'm not a doctor. So depending on how much academics you actually want to do, maybe you do an internship and you fall in love with the work that this organization is doing. That's totally cool. You can just work in that organization. So there are so many different entry levels to these kind of careers. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations like Nature Conservancy, the Audubon Society, so you don't need to get a PhD in order to do really cool scientific work.
And Laurel, turn it over to anything to add there?
Not too much to add. I would say that you're never too young to start learning how to code or use programs like GIS or ArcGIS to start to get a handle on that. And if there's something that you're super passionate about or interested in, start learning about it. See how you can incorporate it into like a science fair project or something that you can do in school, and start learning about that particular area. I would say it's never too early to start.
Great advice, thank you. So we are slightly over time, but I do want to get to this last question that we have, because I think it's a nice way to wrap up. So the question is, what fields would you recommend for students to pursue as they kind of look forward to college, more computer science or math or something more applied? And maybe we'll rotate around. Maybe we'll start with Laurel. We'll go in the order that you all spoke, and you can chime in on this one.
Sure. So you can come into this field from a variety of areas. My undergraduate degree was actually in the social sciences with a little bit of mathematics. So you don't have to be a physicist all the way through. You can come in from a variety of different areas. And I think that's what's so beautiful about earth sciences is it takes so many different minds from so many different areas to come together and make the whole field work, right? It takes a lot of different people. So it really is what aspect you're interested in. I was interested in some mathematics, but also understanding international relations and global studies and how that kind of fits together. And then finally, how does climate play into all of those things? So yeah, I would say kind of pick the area that you're interested in. If you want to go very, very academic and very scientific, then stay towards the sciences. But I have a feeling that Johnny might have more information on that too.
Well, yeah, I agree totally. The route in is so varied. I mean, I biased because I came through physics and it worked out well, because if you do a physics undergraduate degree, you do end up with lots of options. So I could choose between geosciences or, you know, medical physics or all sorts of other things. So that's a really good benefit. So if you're looking at making choices now, and one of the choices which you think would be something you enjoy was physics, I would think it's a great option, is all I usually say. But that doesn't mean there aren't loads of other great options too.
Yeah, I second all of that. I would say don't worry too much about what field you want to get into or what you need to study. Programming languages are always changing, tools are always changing. The most valuable thing is to have interest in understanding how things work. So critical thinking is really important, whether you're going to be a programmer or a field scientist or a designer. Be willing to learn. The ability to work with people is just really valuable throughout every career, especially in the sciences, learning how to communicate information. So I vote for interdisciplinary studies. Just try everything, understand a little bit of everything, and then whatever you're passionate about, you can always follow that a little bit more deeper. But you won't know what you're really passionate about until you kind of try a little bit of everything. But good luck.
Well, that's a great spot to end. Thank you so much to our panelists and great advice, great questions. Thank you. If you had a question that we didn't get to, please feel free to contact me. You should all have my email address. If you have an additional question for any of our speakers, feel free to get in touch with me and we'll definitely connect everybody. Thank you so much again to our wonderful speakers. And thank you again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day if you're logging off. Thank you, Dara. Thank you, Johnny. And thank you, Laurel. Okay. Bye.
Bye.